reserve that simply because we have a 10% increase in everything else.
Right, so you got
So they're looking, and even though they're separate entities, they're separate, they still come from the same taxpayer's pocket.
so you're going to, at the end of the day, have to either
But now
you have
later.
to reserve it now.
Exactly.
Here we go again.
So,
So I think it's only
welcome, everyone. Before I call the meeting to order, just like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place in the territory of the Coast Salish people. And for those of you that aren't aware quite yet, today is Pink Shirt Day, or otherwise known as Anti-Bullying Day. And want to acknowledge those individuals around the table and amongst staff that are wearing the emblematic pink shirt today. Thank you. So with that, I will call the regular meeting of the hospital board to order. And our first item before us today is the approval of the agenda. Ms. Harrison, is there anything new?
There are no new business items, Mr. Chair.
Order, Director Kuhn. Could we have a motion to approve the agenda as circulated, moved and seconded? Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is adoption of the minutes, and the recommendation is that the minutes of the hospital board meeting of December 12th, 2018 be adopted.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director McGonigal. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? Not opposed, the motion carries. Any business arising?
There is none, Mr. Chair.
Now we come to the public input period for those that would like to provide some input to the board on matters pertaining to the agenda, and I'd like to invite anyone that would like to provide input to come forward now, and you've got 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Don Grant, and I've lived within the bounds of the CVRD most of my life, live in Ladysmith. And why I'm here is I have a problem with pay parking, and I know it's early yet to be bringing this up about the hospital to be. It doesn't have a parking lot. It's not even planned, I suppose. But at the same time, VHA is more than willing to put pay parking in because of the revenues. There are several places in BC, starting with Mission and going to Delta, that I've documented as to what they have done to avoid this pay parking. I think first of all, it's immoral. Most people I've ever talked to think that it's a burden, and it has a lot of implications as to whether people even go to visit other people in the hospital because they don't want to go through the hassle of parking, pay parking. And so it's got a lot of many implications that you might not even think of. In our government it's Canada's mandate that I'm just going to quote, and you're probably fully aware of it, but I just want to read for this reason. Under the terms of the Canada Health Act, all insured persons basically that are legal residents of Canada, including permanent residents, are entitled to receive insured services without co-payment. And that without co-payment says it all as far as pay parking is concerned, because that's exactly what that is. And not to mention, you know, such services are defined as medically, you know, it goes into the services that are within the Act. And so for that reason, too. Anyway, as I was saying, I guess, Mission and Delta, the mayor of Delta in 2010, Lois Jackson, she had initiative enough to create a bylaw that looked after public parking, no pay parking. And Fraser medical people, they took great offense to this, of course, but what she said is, well, the side effects of this no pay parking was something that they didn't foresee. And that was they all of a sudden didn't have any problem with people parking illegally. And so they didn't have to process this through policing and towing and impounding and everything else.
Don, you got about a minute left.
Okay. So anyway, that was Delta initiation. So along comes 2016 and Campbell River and of course Comox have come online. And what they did pretty much is copy Delta. And I have here a handout of what they did in Campbell River. And Andy Adams is the mayor there. He's very approachable. I've been in touch with him a lot in the past year by email. And the process that they went through is described here. And
You got about 15 seconds left.
I would like to hand these out if I can.
Can you provide them to our staff and they'll make sure everybody
Okay.
gets one?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don, and I appreciate you coming and putting your issue on the record for us. And I'm sure our staff and staff of the Island Health have heard you as well. So thank you very much.
There's a lot of horror stories around it if you research a little bit about
Appreciate it.
people and pay parking.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to provide any input to the board today? Seeing none. Down to information. I'd like to welcome Dr. Robertson. to the lectern, and Director McGonigal.
Just before we start, if you'll note the number on the report, I hope that's not an indication of something to come. H1N1 is the
He really
very
read his
appropriate
agenda.
for the hospital board meeting.
Wow, that's
I'm back.
incredibly perceptive, Director McGonigal. There we go. Well, what a perfect segue to Dr. Robertson.
Something
And
about
I
it.
understand you have a PowerPoint presentation for us.
Yeah, I do, and it's on either side.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to all of you. I had a brief conversation with Mark before starting. Some of you have heard me or others talk about this topic many times, and others I know are new. I'm trying to pitch what I'm going to say so that it'll be roughly between the knowledge level of those who've heard a lot before and the knowledge level of those who've heard none of these presentations. And in that way, at least I'll get it wrong for everybody. If you wish to ask questions and interrupt on the way through, I absolutely don't mind at all. And if you want to wait until the end, that's absolutely fine too. I'm yours for the time I'm here. Ken Shampoo, the project director, and Rory, who works with him, Rory Allen, Alice, my co-lead, and Emma James, the director for the Cowichan Valley, who are the people who I work substantially with on this project, are all actually in Vancouver at various conferences, which is why you're stuck with me. I'm the executive medical director who covers the Cowichan Valley, Saanich Peninsula, the Gulf Islands, and a bunch of other stuff. I might have given some of you anesthetics over the years. I worked for 12 years as an anesthesiologist in Cowichan Hospital, prior to that in the Maritimes, and have been intensely involved with this project really since its outset, and actually for a good many years before. So a hospital, if we get to build one, and I'll go into that later, must be viewed as part of a broader Cowichan Valley health and care plan. It's only one piece of a matrix of health care. We've got a huge opportunity and a considerable challenge if this project goes ahead. We've got to present a business case that is acceptable to the Treasury Board, or it'll go nowhere. At the same time, we want to present a business case that fulfills the needs and the desires of the community, and also answers the needs and the desires of those who will be paying for it, in which this room has a considerable interest. We've demonstrated very clearly, if we look at North Island, we've demonstrated, and many other facilities, that we cannot build as a society, we can't build a hospital so big that we can't fill it. We simply can't afford to as a country, and we live in a rich country. If you look at North Island, we opened it up, we expanded the bed base by 25%, something like that. We had it full in 2 weeks. Is the community necessarily better in terms of its health care as a result of that? That's a really open question, because we have a number of people in the facility now who don't actually need acute care, and all of you know about that issue. So what we have to do when we're looking at this hospital plan is look at it within the whole of healthcare in the community. And if you look at the wheels on the screen there, community care is absolutely essential for that. Integrated, well-planned community care, but also dealing with local issues and taking advantage of the local assets that we have. Our Cowichan is a huge asset for community care. Primary care has been much in the headlines recently. We have a number of people now in the Cowichan Valley who have no GPs. We didn't have that 10 years ago, but we've had a few retirements. Anyone for whom Len Roy was a GP will understand that process. We have to recognize, as a result of decades or even centuries of injustice, that we have a considerable health issue within Aboriginal health. And we have to do better with that. We have a not brilliant history, frankly, in Cowichan Hospital, and a worse history maybe in many ways when it was King's Daughters. We have an opportunity to reset that, and we have to do that. And we have to do it well. We've got a lot of learning to do. Healthy living, absolutely. The idea is that we will all live healthily, and then we'll stay at home as we get old, and then we'll die. Some of us will actually get to do that, and we have to work to try and increase the number. Mental health, substance use, huge problem. Opioid addiction is a massive problem. None of these involve hospitals, except they do because people turn up at the doors, but do they need to? Long-term care, we all know about, and we're doing a lot of work with that to try and deal with it. We are in parallel with replacing the hospital. We have set up a Cowichan Valley Health and Care Plan process, which is looking at the integration of health and care throughout the community. So the hospital is really one piece of the broader project. And it's essential that we get it all right. In North Island, when we were building the North Island hospitals, we got to the business case development process around about 2011, something like that. Each community had been through a pretty grueling 5 or 6 years of deciding whether to build one hospital or two. They came out of that. The mood in which they went into the two-hospital process was somewhat restraining because of that history. We don't have any of those conflict issues within Cowichan, and that's allowed us, and the lessons we've had from North Island, it's allowed us to step back and take a much broader view of healthcare as a whole, and of a hospital as an integrated piece within that. And it's vital that we get that right. The vision, the principles, and I hope all of you will get thoroughly familiar with the logo that's now up on the wall. That diagram, I suspect you'll see a lot of. That page encapsulates what we want to do and what we want to guide us in all of our meetings. The columns, I did a laser pointer, but laser pointers don't work on TV screens apparently. On the left and right side, you've got the values that will guide the health system in the future, and the values that will guide the construction of the project. On the bottom, we have the facility design principles that we're going to embed in everything we do. It's got to be a collaborative process, the designing. It has to be flexible because, frankly, most of us have some idea of what healthcare will look like in 20 years' time, but we're not brilliant. If we look at Cowichan Hospital, it opened in 1967. It's doing many things today that simply didn't exist, and frankly, most of them hadn't even been thought of in 1967. In 1967, if you got a cataract, you went blind. There was no choice. If you got arthritis in your hips or your knees, you bought yourself a wheelchair. There was no option. These are now routine parts of care. We could not have predicted that. It had 2 X-ray machines there, both of which did plain film X-rays. And it had a remarkable machine that was capable of developing as many as 1,000 images a week. With a CT scanner, Scott will tell you this because he worked in medical imaging for a long time, the CT scanner, we punt through 1,000 images in about 10 seconds. The whole world has completely changed. MRI didn't exist. Nobody had even thought of it. CT scans actually were very conceptual. Ultrasound was actually on the basis of finding submarines using sonar. It was at about that sort of level. So we have to build a building that's flexible. We have to build a building that's sustainable. And this is where we have an enormous opportunity and a great responsibility. You know, the 2 headlines that underline everything, every aspect of life now are that, you know, we need to do this in order to save the world. And the second one is that we failed. And those have to govern the task that we have in creating a building like this. We have to recognize that climate's going to be dramatically different. We're going to have huge rainfalls, but only occasionally. We're going to have long arid spells. Do we do water conservation on site? When the power went out in Nanaimo over Christmas, we were very nearly at the stage where we'd lost water supply to the hospital. If that happens, the building shuts. That became dramatically clear to us. We'd never had to face that before. So how do we deal with that? And that also brings us to the next balancing point, that anything we put in the hospital, anything we put in a building means there's something else we don't put, because we're working within a fixed fiscal envelope if we actually get the go-ahead. And it's not an easy balancing act, and it'll come down to a process of almost endless compromise. So we have to build a building that innovates and that recognizes innovation and makes it possible. We propose to put things like intensive care unit wired in with all the other intensive care units up and down the island so that we can do consultations with specialists in Vancouver or Nanaimo or Victoria on an instant basis with shared monitoring samples, telehealth out of the facility and into the facility, point of care testing in laboratory. All of these ideas we have to enable. Can I tell you where they're all going to go? No, but we have to build the capacity for those sorts of things into the building. So we start off when we're going through a process like this with a needs analysis. And much of this will be repetition for some of you, but for some of you it might be new. Anyone who's spent any time at CDH will know this well, but to summarize it, it's a 50-year-old building. It's a very tired building. It's got an extreme seismic risk. Essentially, if the world shakes, the walls are cracking. Many of the interior walls are brick and solid and load-bearing, which means it's very difficult to replace them. There are many parts of the building, because of asbestos, where you can't hang a picture without putting on a hazmat suit. And these all restrict the flexibility of the building as it currently stands. It's also a building that's being asked to work with a healthcare system that's dramatically different, from what it was when it was built. The operating rooms, 3 out of the 4 of them, are frankly too small for much modern equipment, which simply didn't exist when the building was built. We have cast iron sewage pipes in the ceilings. You can see some of them in the picture of health records there on the top right-hand corner, which do have a habit occasionally of oozing. We have storage equipment issues on the bottom left of that screen, where we have rooms that were dedicated to completely different tasks when they were built, currently filled with equipment that didn't exist when the hospital was built. The top left shows you where, that was a picture from, I think, 2017, where the underside of the eyebrows over the windows was starting to peel and fall. And so we have constant remediation issues with this building. And one of the other tasks we have to recognize is that we have to be working in this building for the next 6 years or so, even if we get the go-ahead to replace it. There is no feasible long-term renovation option for that building. We have looked at, we've taken an extensive look at renovating it to the point where it's seismically sound. What that would essentially amount to is putting a concrete carcass around the outside and supporting the building inside that, and then you would end up with a building that was seismically sound but was still designed for healthcare in 1967. There are parts of the building we could keep. The emerge unit would be a possible, but of course it's tied into all the power system. We've gone through staged replacement on site as an option, and that will also be presented as part of the business case. That would be a 2-phase project. It would be extraordinarily disruptive, and you would end up with not, frankly, a terribly cohesive hospital that would be built in 2 parts of the current building, and it simply makes no economic sense to do that, which was why that idea got rejected way back when we started looking for land to put a new hospital on. So we have gone through those options. The end result of that was the presentation of a concept plan in January of last year, just over a year ago. The concept plan went in. The concept plan is a kind of a 30,000-foot view. It comes up with an expression of need. Once that was presented, it was accepted, and as you can see from the photograph there from last summer, some of you I'm sure will have been there, we got the go-ahead to go to commission a business case for replacement. The business case moves things much more closely down to ground level. The concept plan's a Class D estimate, and essentially it's an expression of need. It's an invited expression of need, but it's an expression of need nonetheless. The business case gets you down to a Class C level, plus or minus 15%, and contains considerably more detail. But you'll see on the diagram here, the concept plan took about a year to put in, business case about 18 months. We're aiming to have that submitted by the end of this calendar year. We might have it ready for the September meeting of the VIHA board. We think it's more likely it'll be the November meeting with submission by the end of the calendar year. It will obviously come to this body before it gets submitted for clear reasons of funding, but that is still part of the step. After that, we have to go on to procurement, which is who will build it and how, and then design and construction, which is the architects and the construction process, and finally transition to Island Health and cutting the ribbon on the door and starting to work it. The business plan, the phase that we're in right now, is really a 4-stage process. It involves development of a future state service model, which is how will care be provided and what care will be provided within the new Cowichan Hospital once it's going. That's an analysis of current state. It's an analysis of population projections. It's an analysis of integration of healthcare within the broad spectrum of healthcare on the island. Because we have to recognize that a hospital like Cowichan, if we're going to deal with it responsibly, has to do care that is appropriate to Cowichan and care that is for which there is sufficient numbers to make it worth doing and to make it safe to do there. If you're going to have your knee replaced, you want it replaced by someone who replaces a lot of knees. You don't want it by someone who does one a year. So you do programs where they are sustainable and where they are appropriate. As far as possible within Island Health, we've said we will do care close to home, but close to home where close to home is the best option. If you're going to have your coronary arteries dealt with, you do not do that in Cowichan, and you never will, and nor you should. We do that, the island-wide program is based out of Victoria. On the other hand, knee replacement, yes, absolutely. That's very appropriate indeed, and we would promote that. So future state service model looks at, it starts off with, we have 89,000 people, 83,000, somewhere 80 to 90,000. This is our age range, these are our population projections, these are the services that it is appropriate for us to deal with in this community. We've been doing that analysis for the last 3 months, and we're pretty much complete on that. We know how much we need, or we think we need, in order to provide appropriate care in terms of emergency rooms, in terms of surgical programs, in terms of internal medicine programs, specialty programs, visiting specialists, and integration with the community. After that, you move into the functional program. So what will be required within the facility in order to provide that level of care? If we're going to deliver babies, then we have to have delivery rooms, and we have to have anesthesia, and we have to have obstetricians and operating rooms available. And we also have to have a nursery, but what level of nursery do we have? Currently, we have a very basic nursery system, and if a baby needs supplemental oxygen when they're born, even if it's only for a matter of 2 or 3 hours, we have to transfer them out. And we transfer quite a few babies to VGH, some even to Vancouver when VGH is full. So we're making a case for putting a level 1 nursery which will allow short-term supplemental oxygen monitoring of oxygen levels in babies, which will mean fewer transfers. But it means increased staff and space, which has to then come from somewhere else. So we have this balancing act of what would be appropriate to put in a hospital. It might not be there, some of it, and some of what's there right now might not be appropriate for the future or even sustainable for the future, and we have to deal with all those questions. So this becomes it feeds then into the design process. We then move on to indicative design, and we'll be doing that sometime in the summer. And if you look at this diagram here, this will give you an idea of the complexity of the process. So we've recruited the project team, that's done. Clinical engagement, we're finished with that, really. We've got to write up the final reports, but basically that's in. Future state service model moves in tandem with clinical engagement. If we're going to catch babies and have a nursery, this is the sort of thing we need to have in the building. We then move on to the functional program. That's the stage we're at right now, and we do that at the same time as the indicative design. Those two, when they're done, allow us to say the building will be this size, it will have this many parking spaces, we think, it will have this integration, we will need to do this in the community, this in the hospital. And I'd rather not go to paid parking because we're an awfully long way away from paid parking, but I've never yet done a presentation where paid parking and free Wi-Fi haven't come up. And once we come out with the functional program, the indicative design, then we can do the financial modeling, the risk, and the procurement analysis. And at that point, we can then present the business case to the ministry, which will give them a decent estimate of what we realistically think is a responsible solution to the healthcare needs within the community for the hospital. So, what might be different? What are we thinking of? What are we going to change, do we think, in the healthcare, and what are we going to do the same of? What are we going to do at the same level that we currently do? Sorry, I'm getting a bit fuddled. We need to recognize that we need to expand and we need to do much better with regard to Indigenous focused services. Any future service model has to be recognized for what it is. It's an educated estimate of how things might develop. I often actually think when we get to this stage we should have a crystal ball in the middle of the room, because we're making an educated guess, but some of it really is an estimate. We will be looking for enhanced maternity services. I spoke a bit about that. With regard to Indigenous focus services, they have to be developed in tandem with our Indigenous partners, and we are engaged in a process of doing so. It is a slow process. It's going to take a lot of time, and it requires a lot of dedication, but it will benefit greatly from that, and benefit greatly from doing it properly. We're looking to expand psychiatric and addiction services because that's clearly becoming a major issue for us in the society. We're looking to increase the use of technology, virtual care opportunities to bring island-wide and province-wide care to the Cowichan Valley so that we can consult anywhere, anytime with anyone. We're looking to modernize and expand the core current inpatient services from where they are and to raise them to a sustainable size. Many of you will know Dr. Bill Nielsen, a urologist who's been working here in a solo practice for many years, and realistically this community should probably have an expanded urology service, but we can't fit them in the building. And those are issues that we really do need to recognize. We'll be looking at greatly expanded ambulatory care. The space in Cowichan in that part everybody knows about. We will be at the in-camera meeting in March, and Ken will be here for that one. We will have a capital ceiling, and we'll want to, and I should say this will be an unpopular one. When we get approved, I'll say we will get approved, if we get approved to go to procurement, we get approved to go beyond business case, at that point we will have a fixed capital ceiling. We moved from a process 3 years ago where we had infinite opportunity and no certainty to a process when we opened the door of having absolute certainty and no opportunity for change or development or ideas because everything's now fixed. Once we get approved through business case to go to the next phase, we have considerable certainty on the capital ceiling, and it's unlikely that that will ever be changed. There is uncertainty about what we can do with it. We don't know how cost is going to accelerate and cost is going to escalate. We can estimate, and that will have a huge effect on what we actually get to build with the capital ceiling we get. But we at least know where the capital ceiling is. And for the purposes of this room, we have to remember that everything that comes out of the hospital capital ceiling to do with infrastructure development means less of a hospital in the end. And so we will have a lot of discussions, I'm sure, between this room and us within the project system about exactly that. We're currently engaged in the final stages of a site survey and a site analysis at Balmackinnon. The property looks extremely good from our point of view. We had one slight hiccup. In the middle of the property was a freezer with a bunch of cinch straps around it, which was just sitting in the middle of the property. We were a little bit nervous about what we might find when we opened that. It turned out to be a bunch of rotting deer meat. But beyond that, we've had no problems. The site analysis is very good. The drainage is very good. The slope is excellent. And so from a facility construction point of view, it's a huge opportunity, that site. And I said at the beginning that we have both gift and responsibility. If we get to go ahead with this project, it will be the largest single building construction in healthcare that VHAO, that Vancouver Island has undertaken since the building of VGH in the mid-1980s. North Island was bigger, but it was 2 buildings. Patient Care Centre will end up being a bit smaller. So this is a huge project. And it's a huge and complex project. It's the first unrestrained greenfield project that we've built since VGH in the 1980s. Now, if you go to the Comox site, the Comox Hospital site, that was a greenfield project. It was a flat piece of woodland. But it wasn't unrestrained in its construction, because if you go to the Campbell River site, the Strathcona Regional Hospital District, as part of their signing criteria, said that the new hospital had to be built on the old hospital's land. That was a no negotiation point from their point of view. And that significantly restrained the footprint of the building, which is why if you look at those buildings, we've got shoebox buildings. They're not cubes, they're sort of vertical rectangles. And because we went with a one hospital, two sites, and we wanted staff flexibility, and we wanted each site to be familiar in its layout for everybody. So if you go in the front door of either hospital, you know absolutely the education section's there, the booking office is there, the main corridor's here, the elevators are at the end, emerges in that corner, and medical imaging is down there. It doesn't matter which hospital you're in. The operating rooms are exactly the same. The patient rooms are exactly the same. The inpatient units are exactly the same. The color on the walls is different. That's it. Therefore, the Comox site was constrained to that structure. We don't have that issue within Cowichan. We have a largish piece of land. It's not monstrous, but it's largish. And we have the ability to work with that, which makes a huge difference when you come to blocking out the building. When we built North Island, we said, yep, we'll have an MRI, a fixed magnet in Comox. We won't put one in Campbell River because we can't afford to buy the equipment, but we'll rough in the room. We didn't expect we'd be opening an MRI, and someone came along from the foundation and said, here, you know, here's a bunch of money, you can stick an MRI in there. So we did actually open one on day one. In Cowichan, medical imaging has changed to the point where, yes, absolutely, we'll have one MRI fixed magnet in the building. That's really a given. But do we take the money and spend the capital in order to run the cables to the side of the building so that we can put in another one on the outside of the building if we want to in a few years' time? Because we have the unrestrained landscape, we can do that in terms of traffic direction and building design. We then have to justify spending the money to put the cables in and all the other equipment to the edge of the building so that we can then stick something on the outside, if medical imaging even develops that way. We kind of think it will. Geotechnical analysis is very good. Heliport studies are good. I missed out the very there because of the height of a number of trees. We're working with you, and we'll continue to work with you on key infrastructure needs. The engineering requirements, because of the ground type, structural, mechanical, and so on, are all underway. We've held a good many public engagement sessions, and I'm very grateful to be here. And the master site planning will be starting to occur in March. Mark, you're on the steering committee and sort of are very much part of that. You can talk to that process as it develops. We're finalizing the future state model and the functional program at the moment. We're incorporating the engineering and the technical analysis with clinical planning into an indicative design. We're beginning the costing exercises. That will go on throughout the summer. We'll draft the final business plan document for review and approval. And we have a number of don't knows about this whole process. There are a number of risks in this process. I don't mean risks in terms of things going wrong, but financial risks. When we look at the old site, the one thing I can tell you for sure about that, if we get the go-ahead, is that the old building will be demolished. Other than that, there's very little certainty. We are currently doing an analysis of the old site to determine whether there are any claims upon it. We don't know of any yet, and that will be updated as soon as we know about that. Future meetings with you anytime you want. We're open to invitation at any time. You might get me. You're more likely to get Ken, but you might get me. And if any of you want to ring me up, that's absolutely fine. I can leave a card around, or you can find me through Mark easily enough. As I said, we're aiming for the November board. We're hoping for the September board. And we will bring this to you before it goes to there. So what risks are we looking at, and what uncertainties are there? Anytime we get any meeting, in addition to free parking and free Wi-Fi, we always get asked how many beds will it have, and the answer is we don't know. How big will it be? The most accurate comment, and it would be unfair of me to try to be more accurate than this, the most accurate thing I'll say is that it looks as if it'll be about 3 times the size of the current CDH. It's that sort of range. If you go up to Comox, it'll probably be somewhere around Comox plus about 20%-ish. but in a very different shaped building. It won't be constrained by the shoebox kind of structure. Cost, it's too early to produce anything accurate about that. Cost escalation, once we get the sign up, is high right now, as anyone knows who's tried to build a house or renovate a building, and is rising. We don't know where it'll go. We've absolutely no idea. We've got sort of estimates, but that's a considerable risk for us over the future time. I have said to people that once we get the go-ahead through the business case to go into procurement, every month we delay, you will end up with 5 million less of a hospital out of it because of cost escalation. The community benefits framework, this is a new one for us that we didn't realize was going to be an issue. Large projects have to hire all unionized from an approved list employees. This produces unknown planning costs for us. We're not sure because this is the first major project that will have gone ahead with these, with the community benefits framework in place as a compulsory. And we don't know what effect it'll have on things like cost or efficiency or schedules. We don't have any experience in that. With that sort of damper, I want to come back really to my original starting point before having questions for you. And that is that we have massive opportunity, and it's a hugely exciting opportunity, and we have huge responsibility. And thank you very much. And if I've got my comments somewhere in the middle so nobody's happy, I'm probably just about right.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Robertson. I've got one person on the list and another couple or three, so Director Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Robertson. Will the demolition of the old building come out of the capital funding for the new?
Yes. It'll come out of the total project cost.
And
So Scott wants to talk about that. Yeah.
It's,
Yeah, Scott, you go.
it's actually an
Can you
operating.
speak into the microphone,
Sorry.
please?
That's actually an operating cost. It's only a capital cost if we're building on the same site that we're demolishing. So it will be an operating cost in the year that it's torn down.
Yeah. it's
and
all-
that is 100% provincial responsibility? Or-
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Well, it's Island Health's responsibility.
Well, that's a relief.
Director Justice.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Dr. Robertson. You mentioned that the hospital is just one piece of the
Yep.
larger healthcare puzzle.
Yep.
And maybe the answer to this is in the Cowichan Valley Health and Care Plan, but I was curious whether the current reality of the use of hospital beds as essentially placekeepers for people waiting for long-term care has been considered in the design process.
Yes, it absolutely has, and it's a hugely complex issue. I'm tired. I don't like standing behind lecterns. It's a very complex issue. It is not a simple issue at all. In the bed modeling process that we're required to use, and this is mandated, required to model based on population, previous needs, and future population growth, and so on. And one of the things that we've been required to do is use an ALC, alternate level of care. So these are people who don't actually need hospital-type care, who are, as many of you know, essentially waiting for residential care. We've been required to use an ALC rate of about 8%, 8 or 10%. It's very much lower than any hospital has achieved in BC. And certainly on the island, we're currently running somewhere around about 17 to 20 to 25, depending on which facility you look at. And working with that is extremely difficult. It affects the design because it affects the overall size of any building in terms of inpatient beds. That is going to be regarded as a responsible submission by the Treasury Board. So we have to work on how to make sure that people who don't need to be in hospital don't actually end up there. Do we work on 24-hour in-home care? We're going to have to look at that, and that has to be part of the health and care plan. We have a rapid access discharge unit that we're setting up in the Emerge, so if you arrive in the Emerge, you don't need hospital care, but you can't manage at home. We have to be able to put short-term help for the caregivers and short-term help for the patient in the home to make that possible. So yes, we have to look at that. If not, the end result will be the building will be full on day one. And that's a huge challenge for us as a society, but we've actually got a chance to think about it with this one, because we won't be cutting, if we get the go-ahead and everything goes through without a single stop along the way, we're looking at sort of late 2024. By the time you time out that colored block diagram that I had there. And so we do have time to work on that. We're expanding the number of residential care facilities and beds in the Cowichan Valley, as you know, with the Beverly Street development process. We are producing more hospice-type beds associated with the new hospice building, which has been a huge boost and will be a huge boost for the community. But we have to get to a stage where people age better at home and where they die at home. And we're not there yet to the point where we can get down to 8%. That's the challenge before us.
Thank you.
It's not an easy one. It's not, and it's one that involves every aspect of care and every aspect of society.
Excellent. Director Smith.
Through the chair to Dr. Robertson, one of the things I hear you talking about is moving programs into the community. And does VIHA have the financial resources to do that? I have just been, through the board, assigned a position on our Cowichan. And I hear at the table quite a few conversations about funding and where the funding is going to come from. So they hear that the new hospital will not be accommodating some of the programs. And so that's a concern for the members of the community that are volunteers and working within that area. I have another question, which is in regards to the Comox Campbell River design. I've been in both those hospitals. My daughter is an RN, and she's worked in both those hospitals, and there definitely is issues with the design. But is there a way of looking at that design and using that design to cut down on the costs of a new building, or looking at the Royal Jubilee in Victoria that was recently done and over the past few years, looking at those designs and utilizing those designs instead of creating new designs?
Dr. Robertson.
So I'll answer the second one first. I'll go in reverse order, if that's okay.
Sure.
There are aspects of the design of the North Island that we've learned huge amounts from, and also the PCC. Numbers of inpatient beds per inpatient unit. People will often say that you should adapt the size of the inpatient unit to the size of the footprint of the building and make it work that way. But in operational terms, it actually makes much more sense to adapt the size of the inpatient unit to the nursing ratio. Typically in an inpatient unit, you'll have 4 patients per RN who's on. So you do your unit size in multiples of 4. Not in multiples of 2, because then you end up with a very inefficient working model. So yes, we can save operating costs by looking at the designs up north. Parts of the design in the North Island buildings are really good. The operating rooms are great. They work really well. And so we'll probably just take a carbon picture of them, each individual room, and use them. And other aspects of the design are really good. But because we're not constrained by the footprint, there are substantial parts that we won't use from North Island. It's apparent to us that the way that the Nanaimo emergency room is designed in terms of patient flow is a much more intuitive and probably a much more functional way than the North Island one. So we're going to pick from Nanaimo for that. And actually a couple of other hospitals in the Lower Mainland too who followed that path. So yeah, we're using what learnings we can, but we can't use all of them because the envelope is different, and we can frankly do better than some of the restraining issues. There are issues with design there. They used to have very functional cafeterias where a lot of the staff would meet on their breaks. Now everybody takes their breaks on their floor, and they've lost that social interaction side of life to working. which has both benefits because it takes you a lot less time. If you're on a 15-minute break, you don't want to spend 4 minutes walking to the cafeteria at the beginning and 4 minutes at the end because you get a lot less time sitting down with your coffee. But on the other hand, you lose the social interaction and you lose the professional interaction too. So we need to look carefully at aspects like that. We had a number of people when we moved into North Island, simply because of the size of the place and the way different parts of it were related to each other in the building, who were getting sort of chronic strained foot injuries from walking too far. And so those issues we also need to learn from. Regarding trying to move programs out of hospital that don't need to be in hospital, that's something that to us is a responsible way to deliver health care. It moves, it decreases the capital cost. If you're on, let me pick an example. If you're on intravenous antibiotics, but you're not an inpatient, you need to have intravenous antibiotics once, twice a day, maybe 4 times a day. Typically we can get it to twice. It makes much more sense if you live in downtown Duncan to be able to do that downtown than to have to go to the hospital twice a day, to the emerge unit. It also makes much more sense from the emerge unit's point of view if they're only seeing emergency patients, not doing outpatient work. And from the outpatient clinic's point of view, if we don't have to keep that whole wing manned and lit all night to have people come in at up until midnight, to have people come in at 10 p.m. to have intravenous antibiotics. So the overall operations costs of the health facility go down, and yet we manage to provide the care. And yes, there will always be conflicts between different areas of healthcare that are looking for more money. We are dealing with a system endlessly of seemingly infinite demand and finite resource, and it's not a comfortable place to sit. So yeah, we're looking to move things out if we can to keep the number of people going to hospital to the ones who actually need hospital level care, and that requires transferring funding out into the community. It absolutely does. And the consequence of that is that there will be less in the hospital if you feel you need hospital type care, because it'll happen in the community, and it has to. And that comes back to my original point that we can't build a building so big that we can't fill it. Because we can't afford to run a building that big. It's not an easy one, it's not.
Final follow-up?
Follow-up. In Vernon, when they expanded their hospital, they built an extra, I believe it's 2 floors, while they already had the foundation. Is that a possibility here to build towards our 2050 population and beyond?
Okay. So we are, in the Royal Jubilee, we did that in the patient care centre. We built in an extra floor. We roughed it in, and we had it filled within a couple of years, I think, Scott. It wasn't very long. We are looking at opening day. If we talk about inpatient numbers, we are looking at opening day predicted inpatient needs and 10 years down the road. And yes, we will be roughing in for that. It's not normally something that we get a lot of support for, so we won't, I don't think, be planning to rough in a second MRI suite in the same way that we roughed in one in Campbell River. But we will probably look at trying to rough in the cabling to add one on the outside. So yeah, we are considering that where we think it's appropriate and responsible to do so.
Thank you, and I think it's important for everyone to know that for those of you, this might be your first or second presentation, we absolutely have benefited from the work that's been done up Island. Many of us have been on tours. They've done the mock-up of the various operating rooms and the like, so we're absolutely taking advantage of every opportunity, every learning opportunity that from other projects that have been done, and I think that we're in pretty good hands with Dr. Robertson and his team as far as producing what will ultimately be the best product that we as a community can get for the dollars that may be available for us. So the last name I have, I think, is Director Salmon.
Thank you. Could you say a little bit about the issue of or plans to address the apprehension of newborn babies at hospitals and
Yeah.
couch, and I know it's been in the news a lot lately, including front page of the Globe and Mail.
Yeah, yes, it has. It's been in the news, and actually there was a very passionate presentation at one of the public forums I was at from a member of the Red Willow Society. The apprehension issue is not, it's a matter for maternal child. It's not a health care. It's not something that Island Health has any sort of jurisdiction over. We don't put up babies for adoption. We don't suggest that this particular parent might not be an acceptable parent. And so that's really as far as that one's gone. We have, with the particular case that was very much in the news recently, we have that patient, mum, and the baby spent an extended amount of time in the facility, which probably wasn't the perfect place for them by any means, but it was the best we could do. And so we were sensitive to those particular needs, but the actual decision to do the apprehension and the domestic issues that that particular mother had were not ones that the health authority really has any influence over.
I just,
Follow up pertaining to the hospital?
yes, it's pertaining to your slide that you enhanced maternity benefits, and I think,
Yep.
was there some plans to try to reduce the need for apprehension by improved?
No, that I was talking purely about the facility-based maternity services that we would be planning to put forward a proposal for a what's called level 1 nursery, which would allow us not to transfer for healthcare reasons babies to Vancouver or to Victoria at anything like the rate. But this is not to deal with out-of-hospital issues of maternal care.
Any further questions for Dr. Robertson on the hospitals? Director Toporowski.
Thank you, Chair. I just asked a question on there was a slide there that you had for Aboriginal, I can't remember the wording, but then there was cultural safety as well. So I was just wondering what your input was on that. I just seen you flash through there.
Very much put on the logo. We started with a recognition that the history of our relations with the Aboriginal peoples in the Cowichan Valley and the CDH hospital has not been rosy. And we have an opportunity with this project to do better than that. We set ourselves that task. A group of us in the planning phase went up actually over shortly after New Year and spent time up in Whitehorse, where they have a considerably more advanced and more effective integration of Aboriginal care into their hospital system than we've ever managed in Vancouver Island. We learned a lot from that. And we simply have to live this every day, and we have to recognize that we have a huge issue, and we have to deal with it honestly and openly. And so, yes, we are committed to doing that. We are attempting to integrate with all of the various tribes in the Cowichan Valley and also actually out in Didadat, and also with the First Nations Health Authority. We are looking to have a combined funded First Nations Health Authority and VIHA funded person who is part of our essentially every planning process. We have significant input from Dr. Shannon Waters, the Medical Officer of Health, who is originally Cowichan Tribes on her mother's side. And so she gives us considerable input. We do have better relations than we have had, but boy, we've got a long way to go. And we have to live that. We have to live it every day, and we have to design it into the building, and we probably have to design it into the ongoing operating.
Okay.
Thank you, Director Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One more question for you, Dr. Robertson. Cowichan is one of, as I understand it, one of the rare communities of its size because primary care physicians are still looking after their patients in hospital.
Yep.
Are you making any assumptions about the future of that process in terms of the design of the hospital?
Yeah. The one solid assumption we're making is that we can't tell it's somewhat unpredictable. We've had huge advantage from having family physicians engaged in hospital care in Cowichan, huge advantages. It still happens too in Campbell River and in Comox, but the trend has been for family physicians to progressively move out, with the exception of some passionate ones who really like doing the balance of work, including hospital work. So we are going to have to build in into the building, we're going to have to build in the capacity to have either family physicians coming in on a regular basis, which means that you have to have a welcoming place for a relatively large number of physicians who will be coming in occasionally, and make it possible for them to work through the building and get their information, do whatever they need to, and make it attractive to do so. At the same time, we have to build in the infrastructure and the structure for the possibility that we might have none, and that we might be running a purely hospitalist system, because I can't actually tell you where it's going to go. And that's going to require some degree of complexity in the design. But yeah, we're considering it, and the only thing that's sure about it is we actually don't know where it's going to go.
Director Marsh to close.
Yes, thank you. This isn't actually directly to do with the hospital, but I think it might be indirectly. I learned last week when I was on Penelakut Island that their system of getting people off the island who are in a medical emergency, it takes longer than that magic hour of window. And I wondered, is there any provision for people, because I assume this would be their hospital,
Yes.
and who might fund it? I don't know if it would be INAC at this point or what, if they could have a helipad so that that time would afford them more of a chance to live through a major event.
I mean, we can, in addition to the Cowichan Valley, I also have under my umbrella the whole of the Southern Gulf Islands. And we meet this issue on essentially all of the islands. And it's also true in Quadra and Cortez and anywhere up in the north. The getting the balance between the fact that, frankly, anyone who lives in an island lives at a degree of risk and accepts that when they move there, and at the same time wants to know that if something terrible happens to them, they have at least a reasonable chance of getting through to care. And that balance is not easy. It's not.
So, yeah, I understand that. If I may, and I certainly mean no disrespect, but I think we know that the Penelakut people didn't choose to live on that island. That's the land they were given. So perhaps in the spirit of what VIHA is trying to do around reconciliation, they could be given that special consideration.
Yeah, Penelakut, you're absolutely right. That these are not people who've moved to the island as a conscious choice. And so that island has particular issues. We've enhanced the amount of visits. Graham Blackburn's been going out there for quite a while. And we very much supported that side. And sure, we would be happy to look at it. But we have to develop relations with the Penelakut tribe too.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. This has been very informative. I'm sure that there might be some follow-up questions with some of the members as you go further along in the process. I'm anxious to have you come back and present the more complete business plan at a future date.
Absolutely. You give us the invitation, someone will be here.
Absolutely.
We need to maintain that open communication. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next item before us, we go directly to staff reports. And just prior to this being introduced, I'm going to throw something out on the table for everyone to contemplate. Last year, at the end of the budget process for the Regional Hospital District, there was an additional $1 million added to the 2018 budget for various costs and the like, and everyone is fully aware that we're under significant budget pressure for the regular board, as well as the costs and savings for this new facility. And I'm just tossing out there for consideration, because a number of directors have approached me about what we might do about the budget in the board meeting, and how we might look at possible ways of reducing those costs. And, you know, this is somewhat 11th hour in dealing with the budget, and I wanted to just suggest that a possible way of perhaps lessening the burden to our taxpayers would be to hold off on the increasing of the requisition by $1 million this year and standing pat at the level that we had in 2018. And that would provide a significant relief to taxpayers, even though they're separate budgets, and I fully acknowledge that. It's anticipated that we, last year, we had a reserve fund contribution of $8.4 million for savings for this project. It's in the budget for this year, it's anticipated to be $9.4 million. So I just wanted to toss it out there for your consideration. We can take a deep dive into the regular budget and see whether there may be opportunities for some savings there, or we might look at a different approach and reduce the amount of requisition with this budget, and perhaps then there won't be such a deep need to dive into the regular board budget. So I'm tossing it out there for consideration. We do have a staff report before us. Director Marsh.
I actually feel that we should continue with the way we're going towards saving for the hospital, because we've just heard that the costs are, well, likely going to just continue to escalate. So it just doesn't seem like a sensible thing to do, to just defer now. So, I mean, might feel good to taxpayers now, but certainly down the road it will feel less good.
Thank you, Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would entertain discussing that option. I guess by deferring it this year would be the exact same thing that happened last year, but will happen in 2020, so that we would do a $2 million increase. And I remember last year that was, it felt like it was a little much, but we didn't realize that we were having such a big tax increase happening this year. So I would entertain that idea if there's a motion. I don't believe you're.
No, I'm not making a
Actually have a
motion, and
motion.
I'm bringing it up for discussion, and thank you for that. It's just, we have had our taxpayers approve 2 new services. And without going into the specifics of what we're talking about at the board, a number of directors have approached me with the concern that the number that, and I'm not a big fan of reporting out as a percentage increase, but a number of directors have approached me that the number that we're looking at the board is a substantial number that a number of you have expressed that you're uncomfortable with. And I get that. It's a significant number. We've increased 2 functions. If we weren't increasing those 2 functions, then it might be a little bit more reasonable number. I'm just suggesting that as opposed to doing a deep dive on that when, you know, I think most of the decisions that have been made to this point have been reasonably well-debated decisions, and it will be some very hard choices if there's a desire amongst this board to go and significantly reduce the board budget. This is a possible opportunity to reduce the cost to taxpayers without having to go for a real deep dive into that. So I've got, I think, Director Marsh, and did I see someone over here put up their hand? Director Marsh and Director Salmon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I acknowledge that we do have 2 new services, but I would also like to remind us that we went to referendum to ask if the people wanted those 2 new services, and they knew what their taxes were last year, and the majority of the people voted for those 2 new services, as did the majority of the people vote for the hospital reserve fund and for it to go up every year. So I don't know, it feels like, I mean, when we run our households, sometimes we have to spend money we really would rather not. I'm not excited about the amount of increase on my local property taxes either. However, we have an aging population. We've just heard from Dr. Robertson about the challenges with the hospital and that the price could go up. And I just feel we should continue, and if people think that the board is going down the wrong path in 4 years, then they'll elect other people.
Thank you. Director Salmon.
Thank you. I differ from Director Marsh, more agree with Director Atkin, but I think from the point of view of smoothing, this could be worth discussing because we have the 3.5% bump this year due to the referenda, which won't be there next year. So we could conceivably take off the $1 million from the hospital this year, add it on next year, and we'd have a smoother increase. So I think given the 9% we're looking at from the on the main budget, you should consider this.
Anyone else? Director Salmon, follow up.
Process-wise then, so am I correct? We are approving this budget now. It will not come again to the main board? This is the time? Okay, I'd like to move that we reduce that by $1 million for this year.
Are you moving that? Did I hear that? Do we have a seconder? We have a seconder from Director Marcotte, and I saw Mr. Kieber. Is it appropriate to have staff? Mr. Kieber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From staff's perspective, this is not something that we recommend. We've been having many public meetings, as Dr. Dave Robinson said, about with the public about the new hospital and what they like and what they want, and overwhelming. Every meeting we had, the overwhelming support was that we're planning ahead, that we're putting money aside, and we're building up that reserve fund. Now, this is not saying not to do that. I understand that. But costs are going to be high. And the plan that we had was to go up $1 million each year up to the dollar figure that we're going to have to be borrowing, or we're going to be needing to tax for to pay the debt anyway. So what this means is we're going to have to even have a bigger jump down the road. Because either way, I think that the debt cost is going to be approximately $12 million anyway. So the plan was to go up to $9.5 million now. The plan was to continue to go. The rates of MFA are going up, so you're going to have that additional cost as well. So we understand the crunch that you're in, but it's the hospital budget. This was done, I'm going to say, about 5 years ago, and we never did do the double increase that Director Acton is recommending. So from staff's perspective, we are recommending that you continue with this process that you approved last year.
Thank you, Mr. Kieber. I've got Director Acton, Stone, and Wilson, but Director Acton's already spoken, so I'll put you at the end. Director Stone.
Thank you. So I think, I just want to clarify what I think I heard. Obviously, the motion's been moved that we don't increase the requisition by $1 million this year. But the suggestion was then we increase it by 2. So we'd essentially lose interest on $1 million for a year if we followed that sort of a plan. We're 6 years away from having to service the debt. We're at 8.4 million right now. If we did 2 next year, we'd be at 10, and then in the subsequent years, we'd be getting into the area of $13, $14 million a year in requisition that would be used to service that debt. And this year, we have increased our budget by upwards of over $1 million for those 2 services. Or around $1 million. So I understand the logic behind it. I'm not saying that I don't support that because however you divvy it up, it does come down to I think Director Salmon said something about smoothing it out. And by reducing that increase in requisition this year and absorbing it next year may give an opportunity for a newly formed board to have more confidence in the decisions we make around the budget leading into next year, and that this board can truly own all of those decisions. So, you know, at this point, pending what I hear, I think I actually support this motion.
Thank you, Director Stone. Director Wilson.
Just so I've got this absolutely clear from what Mr. Cooper was saying there, if we defer this $1 million this year, then we will have to pay $2 million next year. I'm not sure how that is smoothing anything out at all.
No, we don't have to.
You don't? So you just don't do it? Okay.
Yeah, just for clarification purposes, we control what the requisition is next year. So we can choose to put it at, current requisition as, our 2018 requisition was 10.291. It's recommended that it be 11.291. The motion on the floor says no, we'll requisition 10.291. Next year, we can choose to make it whatever number we choose. We can make it 11, we can make it 12. But the purposes of this motion is to stand pat at the 2018 requisition level. Director Acton.
I'll just be quick. I feel like this one's going to cause. In the presentation, I did notice there was a lot of ifs and might and so there's a lot of uncertainties moving towards the future anyway. So, and if we talk about how much interest over $1 million, like how much we're basing a decision because staff reminded us about what would happen if we don't put it in the bank right now. How much are we actually talking about for that peace of mind and for taxpayers? Like, there's people in my community, we belong to a lot of schools in my household, and there are moms, I've said this before, they're selling their kids used shoes for $5 on Facebook. Like, things are tight for our communities, and I think we actually have to be cognizant of that.
Thank you. I've got, I'm going to go to Director Yanni DiNardo before I go to Director Marsh and Stone again, and I've got myself on the list. So Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I knew it was going to come down to this. I knew these two functions that, and I had been speaking to them all along, would interfere when our actual jobs are, and this is one of them. I think this is a real big responsibility that we decided years ago to do. And now we're debating, because we have these two new functions and we're going off into unknown territory, this one, to me, was really valuable in putting away this money and thinking ahead of time. And that's the way I believe we should be thinking all along, is making sure. And it's just too bad that we now have to debate because it's the hospital or the two new functions, and very frustrating as a director. But I think that I would really prefer keeping the status quo.
Thank you. Director Staples hasn't spoken yet, so Director Staples.
One of my concerns about doing this, I agree with what Director Yanni DiNardo was just saying. Another concern that I have is that because everything hasn't been finalized and approved, if we start to pull back money that we're investing in this when the final decision is made, I don't know that that is beneficial to that process, because the CVRD's already committed that money moving forward, and that business plan that they're talking about that will be part of that plan. And so for us to pull back, we're right at this decision-making process right now where we're going to find out any time, to pull back now on that process, to me, is extremely irresponsible.
Thank you. I'll go to Director Marsh, then Stone, then myself. Director Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate that thought of the message that might send to Island Health if we were starting to backpedal. That's one I hadn't thought of. I'm wondering through you if I could ask Mr. Keeber or one of his staff how much on the average home $1 million is.
So through you to Director Marsh, so through you, the $1 million is approximately 9.7%. So that's what it from percentage-wise. Over per 100,000, it's $2.46 per 100,000. Overall, right now, your total budget, if you were to go to the proposed 11.2, it's basically $50 per 100,000.
For the total budget?
For the total
I'm
budget.
talking about just for the hospital.
No, that's for the total hospital budget.
Oh, I see. But the increase I'm talking about,
The
the
increase
1
is,
million increase.
the 1 million is 9.72%, which equates to $4.49
For the average house?
per 100,000.
Per 100,000, okay. So the average house is about 500,000, so it's about $20 a year. And what kind of interest can you get having $1 million in reserve or adding it to the other millions?
Investment-wise? Right now, it's 2.5%.
2.5%. Yeah, I hear what Director Acton said. There are many people that are struggling. That's not going to change. That's just going to continue. I don't know when we're going to get our asset management, good, bad news, and what needs to happen there. I think this is reality, and putting it off is partly why local governments have these large increases now, because for decades, people wanted zero increases or inflationary increases, like we were producing widgets rather than supporting community and life. And so I would be sorely disappointed if we change direction just for, I don't even understand why, when it's going to cost more down the road and potentially jeopardize the chance for the business case to be accepted. We've been lauded for the foresight to go ahead and do this, and I didn't realize it didn't happen last year. Is that correct? It didn't happen last year?
No, 2 million extra.
Went on last year?
Yeah.
Because 1 million went for the hospice, correct?
Mr. Kieber.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. In 2018, during that budget process, the board suggested that we increase the requisitions. So in 2018, you did increase it by $1 million. Last year, the contribution went up to 8.4.
Right.
Prior to that, it had been 7.4. So the direction was to increase it $1 million per year. So we're doing it for the second year now, an additional $1 million up to
Right.
9.4.
Thank you. So I don't support not doing it for all the reasons that those who don't support it have said and the reasons that I've said it.
Thank you. I'll go to Director Marcotte, then Stone, then myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been around this board table for quite a number of years, and in all my time, we began looking at this quite some time ago, getting those extra monies set aside for the future. And I can say that none of my constituents, who are very tight with their money, they are very happy. It is a great benefit to all of our communities. So I think it's very important that we keep this on the same level. It's not about money, it's all about health. So, just saying.
Thank you. I've got 2 new speakers, so Director Stone, you're going to have to wait a little bit here. I've got Director Kuhn, Director Smith, and then Director Stone. Director Kuhn.
Yeah, I have to concur with Director Janne Nardo. We knew this was going to come. The board decided to take on these 2 functions. Yes, it was done by referendum, but let's face it, the board pushed for this thing. So now, to cut back on hospital, on the contribution to our hospital fund, I don't think it's right. We're pushing the can down the road. I don't like that. And I say, as a board, we just have to face the music now, because that's what we wanted.
Thank you. Director Smith.
Thank you. I am disappointed that we're sitting here looking at a hospital function that is very important for all our health. Some of us choose to use other facilities, but having a new facility that would be upgraded and meet our needs is very important. I do feel, though, that if people were told prior to the two new services that we would be sitting at a table trying to make a decision on whether we should be funding the hospital or whether we should be funding those two other services, we may have not been sitting here looking at this. We would have looked at, they would have said, we don't believe those services are as important as the hospital and the future of our health and care within our communities. I feel disappointed that we're sitting here having to make this decision.
Thank you, Director Stone.
Thank you. I think that, frankly, I don't think that anybody was unclear that the new services would cost money. I find that analyzing our own municipal budget and looking at our budget, I don't think we're even anywhere close to catching up with the deficit that we're creating every day. So hospital issue aside, we've conflated these two pieces, which is not necessarily invalid in that, this is what the bill looks like at the bottom. We talk about affordability. The irony here is one of our new services is about affordable housing, and yet we keep raising taxes up to put more people in a position where that are challenged to find affordable housing. So the cold reality is that at every level, from infrastructure all the way through to community services, costs are frankly spiraling out of control. And when we look at and again, speaking only for our own municipality, we increased our, added another $1 million this year, $2 million or 2%, so 20% to our capital budget this year, and we're still getting further behind on our deficit in terms of taking care of our infrastructure. And yet things come forward that increase the level of services. Now, I'm not talking about affordable housing. I'm not talking about watershed, because frankly, those are as important as a new hospital in terms of our community health. But they're the nice-to-haves that are maybe not core to our responsibilities. So I made the important qualifier at the opening of the discussion that I supported the discussion at that time, but I think I will be voting against the motion.
Thank you. And, I just want everybody to know that I'm not invested one way or the other in this. I'm bringing a suggestion forward that's reflective of concerns that people have about the dollars that we're looking at increasing our budgets by. And I'm looking at this and I'm concerned about the hyperbole that there's a suggestion that we're cutting back on our commitment to the hospital. We're not cutting back anything. We're just not increasing the contribution to reserves by $1 million. We're putting $8.4 million into the savings account. I'm just suggesting that based on what I've heard from people, that maybe 9.4 is a little excessive for this year. I'm convinced that this, if we were to approve this decision, that it's not in any way going to put at risk the hospital or Island Health or the Treasury Board's view on whether or not this is a deserving project that needs to go ahead. So this is a suggestion that's based on reflection of what a number of you have come to me and suggested that both increases, both in the hospital board and our regular budgets, are on the high side, and was there something that we could do about it? And this is one possibility. So if I've got two people put up their hands, if you've got something new, I think we could probably get to a vote pretty quickly on this. Director Acton and Director Salmon to close. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is to staff then. It's pretty clear that we all agree that the hospital is important. We all agree that perhaps the taxes are too high for this year. My question is, we're about to adopt the budget today, and it sounds like most people at this table would like to find a way to reduce taxes. Can that be adjusted further? Do we have time for that?
Mr. Kieber, on scheduling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So both budgets have to be, both the regional hospital district and the regional district budgets have to be adopted by March 31st. So this is the end of February, so you still have 2 board meetings next month where you can do additional work to the budgets. So yes, you still have time.
Director Salmon.
Thank you. I just agree with Chair Morrison on the hyperbole. Of course, it's not supporting the hospital, it's just deferring in the interest of smoothing. And I just want to add that 9% is really going to cause some blowback in the public. We have to remember the average income here in the Cowichan Valley is $41,000 a year. If we go from our usual 5%-ish increase to a 9%, and then we also have a big bump in hospital, it's, I just don't think it's responsible when we can defer and smooth that out next year. Thank you.
Seeing no other hands, do you have something new to add?
I just want clarification. I think the 9% includes the bump to the hospital, and finance is nodding, just so everyone new realizes. You said 9% and then we're going to add to the hospital?
That's a separate budget. Mr. Kieber.
Well, that's not what I'm getting from
It's
Mr.
9, we're just shy of 10% on the global CVRD budget, and the increase in requisition, separate 9% for the hospital budget. So both.
That's correct.
Right. Does anybody else need any further clarification? Do we have the resolution written down by any chance?
No, but I'm doing it.
So the intent of the motion is to reduce the requisition and reduce the transfer to reserve by $1 million. That's the motion. So if you don't support that, vote against. If you're in support of that, vote in favor. So I will now call the question. All those in favor? Well, I guess we should just go with opposed because we got to
Yes,
record those.
please.
All those opposed? Director
you read
Stone, Director Yanni DiNardo, Director Staples, Director Marsh, Director Kuhn, Director Nicholson, Director Justice, and Director Acton. And
Could you leave your hands up, please? Thank you. It's a weighted vote, so I need to record this. Why can I not see this? Okay, Lori,
the motion's defeated.
Aaron, yeah, I still need, okay. Yeah, defeat, thank you.
Item number, any other further discussion? Does staff want to present anything on HSR1?
Point of clarification. Just a point of clarification, Mr. Chair. As I understand it, the staff report is related to the bylaw that's on the agenda before you. And with not going forward with an additional $1 million requisition, that bylaw is going to have to be adopted and come back, correct?
We didn't change it.
Okay, all right.
Going to staff, since it's unchanged, anything further to add on the staff report?
So, Mr. Chair, no, we have nothing further to add to the current budget report.
Any of the board have any questions for staff on the current staff report? And did we have there's no resolution with that?
It's for
Oh, yeah,
information.
for information. Okay, next, 13, HB1, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the recommendation is that CVR HD bylaw number 144, Cowichan Valley Regional Hospital District Annual Budget Bylaw 2019 be granted first, second, and third reading.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? And any opposed? We have Director
got it.
Smith opposed.
Thank you.
That motion carries. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Recommendation is that CVR HD bylaw number 144, Cowichan Valley Regional Hospital District Annual Budget Bylaw 2019 be adopted.
Call the question, all in favor? Any opposed? Director Smith opposed. That motion carries. Through to question period. Oh,
No,
no, what?
no, it's adjournment, right? Like, let's go.
Or don't we go to
So,
question period
yes.
before we adjourn?
Yes, but you're missing all these other things, it doesn't matter. Okay,
Well,
let's just,
Mr. Barry tells me if there's nothing in there to just go right through to
Okay.
the next item.
okay.
Anybody in the gallery have any questions for the chair? Seeing none, motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Those opposed, carry. When do we come back? 1:30? 1 o'clock? No, 1 o'clock, I thought.
1:30.
Okay.
Just a point of clarification, folks, the board comes back at 1:30. Regional services resumes at 1. Lunch is now.